Every parent knows the weight of watching their child's eyes when you can't provide what they need. When Jonas Calder lost his job and home, he felt like he'd failed his 8-year-old daughter Lena in every way that mattered. All he could offer her was a run-down house filled with junk that his uncle had left behind. The neighbors called it the junk house because of all the old machinery and broken radios scattered everywhere. While Jonas worried about bills and job interviews, Lena explored their strange new home and found wonder in the forgotten things. One day she came to him and whispered, "Dad, there's something in the junk house." What Jonas found behind a hidden wall would change everything. His uncle had left behind a secret laboratory with inventions worth $50 million. But when others learned about the discovery, Jonas realized he'd have to fight to protect both his daughter and the legacy his family had been hiding. What would you do if losing everything led you to find more than you ever imagined? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the grimy windows of what the locals had dubbed the junk house, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories in the stale air. Jonas Calder stood in the doorway of what had once been a living room, watching his daughter Lena navigate between towers of old electronics and rusted mechanical parts with the grace of a child who had learned to find beauty in broken things. 3 months ago, Jonas had been a project manager at Meridian Construction, pulling down $65,000 a year and living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with Lena in the suburbs of Millbrook. He had health insurance, a savings account, and plans for Lena's college fund. Then the recession hit the construction industry like a sledgehammer, and companies started laying off workers in waves. Jonas had thought his 15 years of experience would protect him. But when Meridian downsized by 40%, seniority meant nothing. The unemployment benefits lasted 8 weeks. His savings account, which had seemed reasonable for emergencies, evaporated with shocking speed when faced with rent, utilities, groceries, and Lena's school expenses. He had applied for every construction job within a 50-mile radius, then expanded his search to include project management positions in other industries. Nothing. The economy had too many qualified people chasing too few positions. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday morning while Lena was at school. Jonas had stared at the legal document, feeling something cold settle in his chest. He had exactly 17 days to come up with 3 months back, rent, or find somewhere else to live. That evening, as he watched Lena do her homework at their small kitchen table, he realized he would have to tell her they were losing their home. But before he could find the words, the phone rang. It was Margaret Winters, the lawyer handling his great-uncle Chester's estate. Uncle Chester had died 6 months. Earlier, a man Jonas barely remembered from childhood family gatherings, known for his wild stories about inventions and government conspiracies. Most of the family had considered Chester eccentric at best, possibly mentally ill at worst. "Your uncle left you his property in Millbrook," Margaret had said, her voice carrying a note of apologetic resignation. "I have to be honest with you, Mr. Calder. It's not much. The house needs extensive work, and it's filled with, well, decades of collected items. But it's yours free and clear, no mortgage, and the property taxes are current." Jonas had driven out to see the house that same evening, leaving Lena with their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. The property sat on 2 acres at the end of Maple Street, where the suburban development gave way to overgrown fields. The house itself was a 1940s craftsman that might have been charming once, but years of neglect had left the white paint peeling and the front porch sagging. What struck Jonas immediately was the sheer volume of stuff visible through every window, stacks of boxes, electronic equipment, and machinery that seemed to fill every available space. The key Margaret had given him stuck in the front door lock, but eventually turned with a grudging click. The smell hit him first, not unpleasant, but musty and complex, like old books mixed with motor oil and something metallic he couldn't identify. The interior was a maze. Narrow pathways wound between towers of cardboard boxes, shelves lined with radio parts, and tables covered with mechanical devices in various states of assembly and disrepair. In what had once been the living room, a massive oak desk sat buried under layers of blueprints, technical manuals, and notebooks filled with Chester's precise handwriting. Jonas had picked up one of the notebooks at random and found pages of mathematical equations, circuit diagrams, and notes about something called harmonic energy conversion. The writing was methodical, almost obsessive, with dates going back decades. Standing there in the cluttered house, Jonas had felt a strange mix of desperation and possibility. It wasn't the home he would have chosen for Lena, but it was shelter, and it was free. More importantly, it was theirs, at least until he could figure out something better. Now, 3 weeks later, Jonas watched Lena crouch beside an old radio, her small fingers tracing the brass dials with the kind of reverence other children reserved for toys. She had adapted to their new circumstances with a resilience that both amazed and broke his heart. When he had explained that they were moving to Uncle Chester's house, she had simply nodded and asked if she could bring her books. "Dad, look at this," Lena called, holding up what appeared to be a hand-built crystal radio. Uncle Chester wrote his name right here on the bottom. Jonas joined her beside the radio, noting the careful inscription, C. Calder, 1978, Prototype, 3. Everything in the house seemed to be labeled this, way dates, version numbers, cryptic notations that suggested Chester had been far more methodical in his collecting than it first appeared. "He must have built this himself," Jonas said, examining the craftsmanship. The components were arranged with precision, and the soldering work was professional quality. "Your great-uncle was apparently quite an inventor." Lena's eyes lit up with the kind of curiosity that made Jonas remember why he loved being her father, even when everything else in his life felt like it was falling apart. She had her mother's eyes, Sarah's eyes bright green, and always asking questions. Sarah had died in a car accident when Lena was 3, leaving Jonas to navigate single parenthood while grieving the loss of the woman who had been his anchor. In many ways, that loss had prepared him for this current crisis. When you've already lost the most important thing in your life, other losses feel manageable by comparison. "Can we make it work?" Lena asked, cradling the radio carefully. "Maybe," Jonas said, though he had no idea how to repair a crystal radio. "We'll have to learn together." This had become their routine over the past 3 weeks. While Jonas spent his mornings applying for jobs online and his afternoons driving to interviews that seemed to go nowhere, Lena explored the house like an archaeologist, uncovering treasures and curiosities that spoke to Chester's decades of solitary work. She had found boxes of vacuum tubes arranged by size, drawers full of resistors and capacitors sorted by value, and shelves lined with technical manuals covering everything from electronics to mechanical engineering. The more Jonas learned about his uncle, the more mysterious the man became. Neighbors remembered Chester as a quiet loner who had worked at the local radio station for 30 years before retiring in the early 1990s. He had never married, rarely socialized, and spent most of his time tinkering in his house. But the sophistication of the equipment Jonas found suggested Chester's interests had gone far beyond hobbyist electronics. In the basement workshop, Jonas had discovered a complete electronics lab with test equipment that looked expensive and professional. Oscilloscopes, frequency generators, and measurement devices that Jonas recognized from his engineering courses in college sat on workbenches that Chester had obviously used regularly. The basement also contained something that puzzled Jonas: several areas where the concrete floor showed signs of recent patching, as if Chester had been digging up and repouring sections of the foundation. Mrs. Hartwell, the elderly woman who lived in the house closest to Chester's property, had been their most valuable source of information about their predecessor. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing happening in the neighborhood. 3 days after Jonas and Lena moved in, she had appeared at their front door with a casserole and a wealth of stories about Chester. "Your uncle was a brilliant man," she had told Jonas while Lena played with Mrs. Hartwell's ancient golden retriever in the backyard. But he was also frightened of something. In his later years, he would check his mailbox at odd hours, always looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to be watching him. Mrs. Hartwell had lowered her voice conspiratorially. There were men who came around asking questions about Chester, even after he died. Government types, or maybe corporate. They had that look, you know, too clean, too serious. They wanted to know if Chester had left behind any papers or equipment. Jonas had pressed for more details, but Mrs. Hartwell claimed she had told the men nothing. Chester had been a good neighbor, she said, quiet and helpful when she needed her gutters cleaned or her driveway shoveled. She owed him her loyalty, even in death. Now, as Jonas watched Lena carefully set the crystal radio on Chester's old desk, he wondered what his uncle had been working on that could attract the attention of government agents. The house contained enough electronic equipment to stock a small laboratory, but Jonas had yet to find anything that seemed particularly significant or valuable. Most of the devices appeared to be experiments or prototypes, interesting from a technical standpoint but hardly worth government scrutiny. His laptop chimed with an email notification, pulling Jonas back to the immediate reality of their situation. Another job rejection, this one from a construction firm in the next county. The email was polite and generic, thanking him for his interest, while informing him they had selected a candidate whose qualifications more closely matched their needs. Jonas closed the laptop and rubbed his eyes. The unemployment benefits had stopped 2 weeks ago, and his savings account now contained exactly $47.32. He had been selling items from their old apartment furniture, electronics, anything with value to buy groceries and keep their cell phone service active. But those resources were nearly exhausted. "Dad?" Lena's voice was soft, concerned. "Are you okay?" Jonas looked at his daughter, who was watching him with the kind of adult awareness that no 8-year-old should have to develop. She understood more about their situation than he wished she did, but he had learned that trying to shield her completely from their circumstances only made her more anxious. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, managing a smile, "just thinking about what we should explore next in Uncle Chester's collection." Lena brightened immediately. "I found something interesting in the kitchen. There's a notebook wedged behind the refrigerator. I couldn't get it out, but I could see writing on the edges." Jonas followed her to the kitchen, where she pointed to a gap between the old refrigerator and the wall. Sure enough, Jonas could see the corner of what appeared to be a leather-bound notebook. He managed to work it free, revealing a journal with C. Calder, Workshop Manual, 7, embossed on the cover. The notebook fell open to a page, dated 15 years earlier. Chester's handwriting filled the margins around detailed technical drawings of what appeared to be some kind of energy conversion device. At the bottom of the page, in larger letters than the rest of the text, Chester had written, "They're getting closer. Must finish before they find me." Jonas felt a chill run down his spine as he read the words. Whatever Chester had been working on, whatever had made him fearful in his final years, it was documented in this notebook. And if Mrs. Hartwell was right about men still asking questions, then perhaps Chester's secrets were still worth pursuing or still worth hiding. As the afternoon light began to fade, Jonas sat at Chester's desk with Lena beside him, both of them studying the mysterious notebook. For the first time since losing his job, Jonas felt something other than despair about their future. Perhaps Uncle Chester had left them more than just a house full of junk. Perhaps he had left them a puzzle worth solving, and maybe, just maybe, a way out of their desperate circumstances. 3 days after finding Chester's workshop manual, Jonas woke to the sound of static electricity crackling through the house. The noise was faint but persistent, like the hum of an old television tuned to a dead channel. He checked his phone. 3:47 a.m. Beside him in the double bed they now shared in Chester's old bedroom, Lena stirred, but didn't wake. Jonas slipped out of bed and followed the sound down the hallway, past towers of boxed equipment and shelves lined with mechanical curiosities. The static grew louder as he approached the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. He was certain he had closed it before going to bed. The basement was Chester's domainer workshop that Jonas had only briefly explored. Wooden workbenches lined the walls, covered with electronic testing equipment, soldering stations, and projects in various stages of completion. In the center of the room sat Chester's prized possession, a massive oak cabinet that housed what appeared to be a custom-built radio system with dozens of dials, switches, and meters. The static was coming from this radio. Jonas approached cautiously, noting that several of the meters were active, their needles dancing in response to some invisible signal. He had assumed the radio was non-functional, just another piece of Chester's collection, but clearly it was receiving power from somewhere. A small green light glowed steadily beside a switch marked "Receive." As Jonas reached for the volume control to silence the static, the noise suddenly coalesced into something recognizable, a human voice, speaking through layers of interference. Testing Sunday, March 15th, 1987. This is Chester Calder, recording message number 43 for Project Sanctuary. Jonas froze. His uncle's voice, 3 decades younger but unmistakably the same dry tone Jonas remembered from childhood family gatherings, continued speaking through the ancient radio. "I've confirmed they've been monitoring my communications, the phone calls, the mail, probably the house itself. Dr. Ramsey was right. The Department of Energy investigation was just the beginning. They know what we've accomplished, and they want it buried along with anyone who understands how it works." The voice paused, and Jonas could hear papers rustling in the background of the recording. "I'm implementing the Sanctuary Protocol tonight. The working prototype will be secured in the sub-basement chamber, along with all documentation and component specifications. If something happens to me, if I disappear or die under suspicious circumstances, then the backup transmitter will activate automatically after a preset delay. Anyone in my family who inherits this house will eventually hear this message." Jonas felt his heart racing. His uncle's paranoid stories suddenly didn't seem so paranoid. "The device I've created, what we call the resonance engine, represents a fundamental breakthrough in energy conversion. We're not talking about improved efficiency, we're talking about a technology that could make fossil fuels obsolete overnight. Clean, unlimited power drawn from quantum fluctuations in the vacuum itself. The implications are, the transmission dissolved into static again, but Jonas had heard enough. He fumbled for the notebook, where he had seen Chester write about them getting closer. The dates aligned. Chester had made this recording just 2 years after writing that paranoid note. "Dad?" Lena's voice from the basement stairs made Jonas jump. "What's that noise?" "Just Uncle Chester's radio," Jonas said, though his voice came out strained. "Go back to bed, sweetheart." But Lena was already descending the stairs in her pajamas, her bare feet silent on the wooden steps. She approached the radio with the fearless curiosity that Jonas both admired and worried about. "It's talking," she said, pressing her ear close to one of the speakers. "It's just an old recording, honey. Sometimes radios pick up." "No, Dad." Lena's voice was firm with the certainty that only children possess. "It's trying to tell us something important." As if responding to her words, the static cleared again, and Chester's voice returned with startling clarity. "The resonance engine requires 3 components to function: the harmonic frequency generator, the quantum field stabilizer, and what I call the consciousness interface. The last component is the most crucial and the most dangerous. The device doesn't just convert energy, it responds to human intention, to focused thought patterns. That's why they want it so badly, and why it can never fall into the wrong hands." Lena looked up at Jonas with wide eyes. Uncle Chester hid something special in the house. "Lena, this is just..." Jonas stopped himself. The fear in Chester's recorded voice was genuine, and the technical details were far too sophisticated for a simple hobbyist. Whatever his uncle had been working on, it was real. The voice continued. "I've encoded the access sequence in items throughout the house. The radio will only activate for family members. The receivers are tuned to specific genetic markers in our bloodline. If you're hearing this, then you're a Calder, and you have a choice to make. You can pretend this message never happened, live your life, and let my work remain buried. Or you can follow the clues I've left behind and claim what I've discovered. A new sound emerged from the radio series of musical tones, like a simple melody played on electronic chimes. That's the activation sequence for the first lock, Chester's voice explained. Memorize it. You'll need to reproduce these tones exactly to access the sub-basement chamber. But be warned, once you begin this journey, there will be others who notice. The same people who made me disappear will come looking for you. The static returned, drowning out Chester's voice. Jonas reached for the volume control, but before he could adjust it, the radio fell silent. The green light beside the receive switch flickered once and went dark. "Play it again, Dad," Lena said, her small hand reaching for the power switch. Jonas gently stopped her. "I don't think it works that way, sweetheart." But Lena was already humming the melody. They had heard a simple sequence of 8 notes that she reproduced perfectly. Jonas realized his daughter had inherited more than just her mother's eyes. She had Sarah's gift for music, the ability to hear a tune once and remember it forever. "We have to find Uncle Chester's secret, don't we?" Lena asked, looking up at him with complete trust. Jonas knelt beside his daughter, studying her face in the dim light of the basement workshop. 3 days ago, he had been a desperate man facing eviction and unemployment. Now he was apparently the heir to some kind of scientific breakthrough that his uncle had died protecting. The rational part of his mind insisted this was all nonsense, paranoid delusions of an eccentric old man who had spent too many years alone with his inventions. But the recording had been real. The technical language was precise and detailed. And most convincing of all, Chester had somehow rigged the radio to respond only to family members, which suggested a level of sophistication that went far beyond hobbyist electronics. "What do you think, Lena?" Jonas asked. "Should we try to solve Uncle Chester's puzzle?" Lena nodded solemnly. "He left it for us, didn't he? Like a treasure hunt, but important." Jonas thought about their financial situation, about the rejection letters accumulating in his email inbox, about the $47 in their bank account. Whatever Chester had hidden, it couldn't make their circumstances any worse. And if there was even a small chance that his uncle had actually invented something valuable— "Okay," Jonas said, "we'll try to find Uncle Chester's secret, but this has to be our secret, just between us. We don't tell anyone what we heard tonight." Lena crossed her heart with her finger, a gesture Sarah had taught her years ago. "Promise, Dad." As they climbed the basement stairs together, Jonas found himself humming the 8-note melody Lena had memorized. Tomorrow, they would begin searching for Chester's clues in earnest. Tonight, for the first time in months, Jonas fell asleep with something other than despair filling his thoughts. He dreamed of his uncle's voice, speaking about impossible technologies and unlimited energy, about secrets hidden in plain sight and enemies who would kill to possess them. In his dream, Chester wasn't paranoid at all. He was simply a man who had discovered something wonderful and terrible, and who had chosen to trust his family with the burden of deciding what to do with it. When Jonas woke the next morning, he could still hear the 8-note melody playing in his head, and he knew their lives had changed forever. The blueprint fragment fell from between the pages of a 1970s electronics manual like a whisper from the past. Jonas had been systematically searching Chester's collection, looking for anything that might relate to the 8-note sequence or the mysterious resonance engine, when the torn piece of technical drawing fluttered to the floor. Lena, who had become his eager assistant in their treasure hunt, picked up the fragment and studied it with the focused attention she usually reserved for her favorite books. "Dad, look at these symbols. They're the same ones from Uncle Chester's notebook." Jonas examined the blueprint fragment. It showed part of what appeared to be a cylindrical device with intricate internal components. Mathematical equations filled the margins, along with notes written in Chester's precise handwriting. At the bottom of the fragment, someone had drawn the musical staff notation for the 8-note melody they had heard from the radio. "The resonant frequency generator," Jonas read from the fragment's title. "This must be one of the 3 components Chester mentioned." They were sitting in what had once been Chester's living room, surrounded by the organized chaos of their search. Over the past week, they had developed a system for exploring the house methodically. Jonas would examine the technical aspects of Chester's collection, while Lena used her intuitive understanding to spot patterns and connections that escaped her father's more analytical approach. The search had become necessary for practical reasons, as well as curiosity. Jonas's job prospects remained non-existent, and their savings were nearly depleted. He had started researching the value of Chester's electronics collection, hoping to sell some items without destroying anything that might be important to solving their mystery. Some of the testing equipment in the basement was worth thousands of dollars, enough to keep them housed and fed for several months. But every piece of equipment they examined seemed to be part of Chester's larger project. Nothing appeared random or purely decorative. Even the boxes of vacuum tubes were sorted according to some system that Jonas was beginning to understand, related to harmonic frequencies and resonance patterns. "Mr. Calder?" The voice from the front porch made both Jonas and Lena freeze. They had been so absorbed in studying the blueprint fragment that neither had heard the car pull into their driveway. Jonas peered through the dusty front window and saw a man in his 50s standing on their porch. He wore an expensive-looking grey suit and carried a leather briefcase. His appearance was exactly what Mrs. Hartwell had described: too clean, too serious, with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Don't answer it," Lena whispered, though Jonas had already come to the same conclusion. They waited in silence as the man knocked again, more insistently this time. After several minutes, they heard his footsteps move around the side of the house. Jonas realized he was trying to peer through windows, looking for signs of occupancy. "Mr. Calder, I know you're in there," the man called out. "My name is Marcus Webb. I represent certain interests that had business dealings with your Uncle Chester. I'd like to discuss a proposition that could be very beneficial for you and your daughter." The mention of Lena made Jonas's protective instincts flare. He moved to the window and saw Webb standing in their backyard, studying the house with the methodical attention of someone conducting surveillance. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for this property," Webb continued, his voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. "Cash purchase, well above market value, with no questions asked about the contents. You could be living somewhere much more suitable for a young family by the end of the week." Jonas felt Lena's small hand slip into his. She was frightened, but trying not to show it. The idea of leaving the junk house was appealing. They could start fresh, somewhere safe, somewhere normal. But Chester's warning about people who would kill for his invention echoed in Jonas's mind. Webb walked slowly around the house, and Jonas tracked his movement by following the sound of his footsteps. The man was being thorough, examining the exterior structure, probably looking for signs of recent excavation or modification. When he reached the front of the house again, Webb pulled out his phone and made a brief call. "The subjects are definitely in residence," Jonas heard him say. "The house shows signs of recent habitation, and there's a vehicle registered to Jonas Calder in the driveway. Recommend we move to Phase 2 if he doesn't respond to the initial approach." Phase 2. Jonas didn't like the sound of that. After Webb's car disappeared down Maple Street, Jonas and Lena remained hidden for another hour before resuming their search. The encounter had shaken them both, but it had also confirmed that Chester's paranoia was justified. Someone was indeed watching, and they wanted whatever Chester had hidden badly enough to make unsolicited offers on the property. "We need to find Uncle Chester's secret before they come back," Lena said with the kind of matter-of-fact determination that reminded Jonas of her mother. They returned to examining the blueprint fragment, this time with increased urgency. The technical drawings showed sophisticated engineering that was clearly beyond anything a hobbyist could create. The device appeared to be designed to generate and focus specific electromagnetic frequencies, with components that Jonas recognized from his college engineering courses mixed with others that seemed completely unfamiliar. In the margin of the blueprint, Chester had written a series of numbers: 7.83 Hertz, 14.7 Hertz, 22.1 Hertz. Below the numbers, he had added a note: Schumann resonance, harmonic series, key to consciousness interface. Jonas was familiar with Schumann resonances from his engineering study, extremely low-frequency electromagnetic waves that occurred naturally in the Earth's atmosphere. But he had never heard of anyone trying to artificially generate or manipulate them, and he certainly didn't understand what Chester meant by a consciousness interface. "Dad, I found something," Lena called from across the room. She was standing beside Chester's old television set, holding what appeared to be a small electronic device about the size of a garage door opener. "It was taped to the back of the TV," she explained, handing him the device. "And look, it has the same symbols as the blueprint." The device was clearly one of Chester's creations, built with the same meticulous attention to detail as everything else in the house. It had a small speaker, a digital display, and a series of buttons marked with musical note symbols. When Jonas pressed the power button, the display lit up with the words, "Frequency Generator, Prototype 3. Lena immediately began pressing the buttons in the sequence of the 8-note melody they had memorized. As each note played through the device's speaker, the corresponding frequency appeared on the digital display. When she completed the sequence, the device emitted a soft chime and displayed a new message. "Authentication accepted. Chamber access enabled." "We did it," Lena whispered, her eyes bright with excitement. Jonas felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. They had solved the first part of Chester's puzzle, but he had no idea what chamber access meant, or what they would find when they discovered Chester's hidden laboratory. Webb's visit had made it clear that they were not the only ones interested in Chester's secrets, and Jonas suspected their mysterious visitors would not remain patient much longer. That evening, as Lena slept beside him in Chester's old bedroom, Jonas lay awake studying the blueprint fragment and the frequency generator. Tomorrow, they would begin searching for the entrance to Chester's sub-basement chamber. Tonight, he tried to prepare himself for whatever they might discover about his uncle's revolutionary invention and the dangerous people who wanted to possess it. The Medal of Honor was hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Advanced Electromagnetic Theory, wedged between hundreds of other technical books on Chester's workshop shelves. Lena discovered it while Jonas was examining the basement floor for signs of the sub-basement chamber entrance Chester had mentioned in his recorded message. "Dad, Uncle Chester was a soldier," Lena said, her voice filled with awe as she held up the bronze star-shaped medal. "There's a paper with it too." Jonas abandoned his search and joined his daughter at the bookshelf. The citation that accompanied the medal was dated 1972 and bore the seal of the United States Army. It commended Sergeant Chester Calder for distinguished service in classified research operations and exceptional valor in the defense of vital national security assets. What struck Jonas most was not the medal itself, but the fact that his family had never known about Chester's military service. The man they remembered as an eccentric loner who told wild stories about government conspiracies had apparently been decorated for classified military research. "There's more," Lena said, pulling a manila envelope from the same hiding place. Inside were photographs, military documents, and what appeared to be pages from a classified research journal. The photographs showed a much younger Chester in military uniform, working alongside other scientists in what looked like a sophisticated laboratory. One image caught Jonas's attention: Chester and two other men standing beside a device that bore a striking resemblance to the cylindrical generator shown in the blueprint fragment they had found. The journal pages were heavily redacted, with most of the technical details blacked out by military censors. But enough remained visible to paint a picture of cutting-edge energy research conducted under extreme secrecy. One entry, dated March 1973, mentioned successful demonstration of quantum vacuum energy extraction and potential applications for unlimited clean power generation. "Your uncle was part of something called Project Blackbird," Jonas read from one of the documents, "a classified research program investigating alternative energy sources for national defense applications." The final document in the envelope was a letter from the Department of Defense, dated 6 months after Chester's military commendation. It informed him that Project Blackbird was being terminated. All research materials were to be surrendered to military authorities, and participants were bound by lifetime secrecy agreements. The letter was signed by someone named Colonel Richard Hawthorne. Jonas felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Chester hadn't been a paranoid amateur inventor. He had been a trained military researcher who had apparently continued his classified work in secret after the official program ended. The technology he had hidden in the house wasn't just valuable, it was based on research that the government had once considered vital to national security. "We need to be very careful," Jonas told Lena as they studied the documents together. If Uncle Chester was working on secret military projects, then the people looking for his invention might be more dangerous than we thought. As if summoned by his words, the sound of a car engine came from their driveway. Jonas peered through the basement window and saw Marcus Webb getting out of a black sedan, accompanied by 2 other men in suits. This time, Webb wasn't alone, and he didn't look like he planned to take no for an answer. "Basement," Jonas whispered, gathering up Chester's documents. "Stay quiet and don't come upstairs no matter what you hear." Lena nodded and followed him deeper into the basement workshop, where they crouched behind one of Chester's workbenches. The sound of footsteps on the front porch was followed by aggressive knocking. "Mr. Calder, we know you're in there." Webb's voice carried through the house. "We also know you've been exploring your uncle's collection. This is your last opportunity to discuss this situation reasonably." Jonas heard the front door rattle as someone tested the lock. When that failed, footsteps moved around the house to the back door. The sound of breaking glass told him that Webb and his associates had decided to invite themselves inside. "Search everything," Webb's voice commanded. The old man was clever, but he couldn't have hidden a full laboratory without leaving traces. "Look for recent construction, modified floor plans, anything that doesn't match the original house structure." Jonas held Lena close as they listened to the men moving through the house above them. Furniture was being moved, boxes opened, and papers rustled as Webb's team conducted a thorough search. The invasion felt like a violation of more than just their privacy, was an attack on the sanctuary that Chester had left them. "Sir, you need to see this," one of the men called from what sounded like the kitchen. "The basement access is here, and there are fresh footprints on the stairs." Jonas realized they were trapped. The only exit from the basement led directly to where Webb's men would be coming down. He looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the workshop was too open, with too much equipment to provide adequate cover. "Stay behind the radio," he whispered to Lena, positioning her behind Chester's massive ham radio cabinet. "No matter what happens, don't come out until they're gone." The basement door opened, and Jonas heard footsteps on the wooden stairs. He positioned himself near Chester's workbench, trying to look casual as Webb and one of his associates descended into the workshop. "Mr. Calder," Webb said, his voice carrying false warmth. "I was hoping we could avoid this kind of unpleasantness. Breaking and entering is technically illegal, but I'm sure we can work something out." "Get out of my house," Jonas said, trying to keep his voice steady. Webb smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Your house, yes, but not your uncle's secrets. We represent the original developers of the technology Chester stole when he left military service. We're simply here to reclaim what belongs to us." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jonas lied. "Of course you do," Webb replied, gesturing to the technical equipment surrounding them. "You've been searching through Chester's collection, probably found some of his old research notes, maybe even discovered one of his hiding places." Webb's associate was examining Chester's workbenches methodically, picking up devices and testing electronic equipment. "This is definitely military-grade hardware," he reported. "Some of it matches descriptions from the Project Blackbird inventory." The name of Chester's classified program made Jonas's blood run cold. These men knew exactly what they were looking for, and they had the resources to find it. "Here's what's going to happen," Webb continued conversationally. "You're going to tell us everything you've learned about your uncle's work. In return, we'll make sure you and your daughter can start fresh somewhere far from here, with enough money to never worry about employment again." "And if I refuse?" Jonas asked. Webb's smile disappeared. Let's not explore that possibility just yet. I'd prefer to keep this civilized, for everyone's sake. The threat was clear, but Jonas realized he had one advantage: Webb, and his men didn't know about the hidden chamber yet. As long as Chester's main laboratory remained undiscovered, Jonas and Lena still had something to bargain with. I need time to think about your offer, Jonas said. Of course, Webb replied. 24 hours should be sufficient. We'll be in touch tomorrow evening for your decision. As Webb and his men left the basement, Jonas remained frozen behind the workbench until he heard their car drive away. Only then did he call for Lena to come out of hiding. Are they going to hurt us, Dad? She asked, her small face pale with fear. Jonas knelt beside her, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Not if we're smart and careful, but we need to find Uncle Chester's laboratory soon. It might be the only thing that can protect us. The prototype key was no larger than a house key, but its design was unlike anything Jonas had ever seen. Made from what appeared to be a specialized metal alloy, it had an intricate pattern of geometric shapes cut into its surface, and when Lena held it up to the light from Chester's old desk lamp, the key seemed to shimmer with an internal luminescence. She had found it exactly where Chester's recorded message had suggested family members would discover it hidden inside the mechanism of an antique mantel clock that had belonged to Jonas's grandmother. The clock hadn't worked in decades, but when Lena had pressed the sequence of numbers that corresponded to the 8-note melody on the clock face, a hidden compartment had opened in the base. It's warm, Lena observed, turning the key over in her small hands. Like it has electricity running through it. Jonas examined the key more closely. The metal was warm to the touch, and he could feel a subtle vibration when he held it, as if some kind of energy was flowing through the device. The geometric patterns weren't just decorative, they appeared to be precisely engineered channels, possibly designed to conduct or focus electromagnetic fields. Along with the key, the hidden compartment had contained a folded piece of paper with more of Chester's careful handwriting. The quantum field stabilizer requires both genetic authentication and harmonic resonance to activate. The key will respond only to direct descendants of the Calder bloodline when exposed to the correct frequency sequence. Use the tone generator to prepare the key, then locate the hidden access panel in the basement workshop. Remember, once you enter the laboratory, there's no going back to ignorance. Jonas had spent the morning after Webb's unwelcome visit searching the basement workshop for any sign of a hidden access panel. He had examined every wall, every piece of equipment, every square inch of the concrete floor, but found nothing that looked like a secret entrance. Now, holding Chester's mysterious key, he wondered if he had been searching in the wrong way. Dad, I think we need to use the frequency generator first, Lena said, picking up the electronic device they had discovered behind Chester's television. Uncle Chester's note says the key has to be prepared with the right tones. Jonas nodded and activated the frequency generator. When Lena played the 8-note melody, the device emitted each tone with perfect clarity, and Jonas noticed that the key began to vibrate more noticeably in response to the sounds. By the time the sequence finished, the key was glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with some internal energy source. Now we find the access panel, Jonas said, but he still had no idea where to look. Lena, however, had developed an intuitive understanding of Chester's thinking that often surpassed her father's more logical approach. She walked directly to Chester's massive ham radio cabinet and began examining its base. Uncle Chester loved radios, she explained, and this is the biggest, most important radio in the house. If I were hiding something really secret, I'd put it near the thing I cared about most. Her reasoning made perfect sense. Jonas joined her in examining the radio cabinet, and together they discovered that what appeared to be a solid wooden base was actually a carefully crafted cover. When Jonas pressed against one corner, a section of the base swung away on hidden hinges, revealing an electronic panel embedded in the concrete floor beneath. The panel was about the size of a laptop computer, with a sophisticated display screen and what appeared to be a slot designed to accept Chester's unusual key. But when Jonas inserted the key and tried to turn it, nothing happened. "Maybe it needs both of us," Lena suggested. Uncle Chester's message mentioned genetic authentication. What if it has to sense both our DNA? Jonas was skeptical, but he had learned to trust his daughter's insights about Chester's puzzles. They placed their hands on the panel together, with Jonas holding the key and Lena's small fingers resting on what looked like a scanning surface beside the key slot. The panel immediately came to life, displaying a message in Chester's familiar handwriting. "Welcome, Jonas and Lena Calder. Genetic scan confirmed. Preparing laboratory access." The floor beneath the radio cabinet began to move, sliding away to reveal a metal staircase descending into darkness. Warm air rose from the opening, carrying the scent of electronics and something else ozone, like the smell after a lightning storm. "Uncle Chester built a secret laboratory under the basement," Lena whispered in amazement. Jonas felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he peered down the staircase. Chester's recorded warnings about dangerous people and irreversible choices echoed in his mind. But their encounter with Webb had made it clear that they were already in danger, whether they explored the laboratory or not. "Stay close to me," he told Lena as they began their descent. The staircase led to a corridor lined with the same kind of metal paneling Jonas had seen in military facilities. Overhead lights activated automatically as they walked, revealing that the underground laboratory was far more extensive than Jonas had imagined. The corridor branched in several directions, with signs indicating different research areas: harmonic generation, quantum field laboratory, consciousness interface research. The main laboratory was a marvel of precision engineering. Chester had created a fully functional research facility beneath his house, complete with advanced electronic equipment, computer terminals, and what appeared to be a prototype of the device shown in the blueprint fragments they had found upstairs. The prototype stood in the center of the laboratory, a cylindrical chamber, about 8 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter, constructed from the same unusual metal alloy as the key. Complex geometric patterns covered its surface, and multiple cables connected it to banks of electronic equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. "The resonance engine," Jonas breathed, recognizing the device from Chester's descriptions. Beside the prototype was a computer terminal with a note taped to the screen. "For Jonas and Lena, you found this laboratory. Then the outside world has become too dangerous for you to remain ignorant of what I've discovered. The attached files contain everything you need to understand the resonance engine and its implications. But be warned, this knowledge comes with responsibilities that will change your lives forever." Jonas activated the computer terminal and found hundreds of files documenting Chester's research over several decades. Technical specifications, test results, theoretical papers, and personal logs that revealed the full scope of his uncle's achievement. The resonance engine wasn't just an energy generator, it was a device that could tap into what Chester called quantum vacuum fluctuations, drawing unlimited clean energy from the fundamental structure of space itself. But more than that, Chester had discovered that the device responded to human consciousness, amplifying the focused intentions of its operators in ways that bordered on the miraculous. "It's like magic," Lena said, studying the images on the computer screen. "But it's really science. Advanced science that most people wouldn't understand," Jonas agreed. No wonder Uncle Chester had to hide it. As they explored the laboratory files, Jonas began to understand the magnitude of Chester's discovery. The resonance engine represented a technology that could solve the world's energy problems overnight, but it also had military applications that would fundamentally shift the balance of global power. Any government or corporation that controlled this technology would have an enormous advantage over their competitors. Chester's personal logs revealed his growing paranoia in his later years, and Jonas now understood why. His uncle had possessed something that multiple organizations would kill to obtain, and he had spent decades living with the knowledge that discovery would mean death. "Dad," Lena said quietly, "we're not going to give this to the bad men, are we?" Jonas looked at his daughter, then at the miraculous device Chester had created. Whatever they decided to do with Chester's invention would determine not just their own future, but potentially the future of humanity itself. "No, sweetheart," he said finally. "We're going to figure out how to use Uncle Chester's gift the right way." The video message was hidden inside Chester's old television set, just as his radio message had been embedded in the ham radio system. But this recording was different, more recent, more urgent, and filled with information that changed everything Jonas thought he knew about his uncle's fate. Chester's face appeared on the television screen as soon as Jonas activated the hidden playback system, and Jonas was struck by how much older his uncle looked than in the military photographs they had found. His hair was completely grey, his face lined with the weight of decades spent in hiding, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence Jonas remembered from childhood. "If you're watching this, Jonas, then you've found my laboratory and begun to understand what I've been protecting," Chester's recorded image said. "But there's something else you need to know, something I couldn't risk putting in the radio transmission." Chester paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression of profound sadness. "I'm not dead, Jonas. My death was staged, necessary to throw off the people who have been hunting me for 30 years. I've been living in a secure facility, continuing my research, waiting for the right time to emerge and reveal what I've discovered to the world." Jonas felt his legs give out, and he sat down heavily in Chester's old recliner. Beside him, Lena stared at the television screen with wide eyes, processing the impossible news that their great-uncle was alive. "The resonance engine you found in the laboratory is only a prototype," Chester continued. "I've built a full-scale version in my current location, and I've confirmed that it works exactly as my theories predicted. The device can generate unlimited clean energy, but more importantly, it can amplify human consciousness in ways that could transform our species." The camera angle shifted, and Jonas could see that Chester was speaking from what appeared to be another laboratory, this one even more sophisticated than the one hidden beneath the house. "The consciousness interface component I mentioned is the key to everything. The resonance engine doesn't just convert quantum vacuum energy into usable power, it creates a feedback loop with human thought patterns, allowing focused intention to direct and amplify the energy output in ways that seem impossible." Chester leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "I've discovered that our consciousness isn't confined to our brains, Jonas. It's connected to the quantum field that underlies all reality. The resonance engine simply provides a technological interface to access that connection. In the right hands, it could heal the sick, restore damaged ecosystems, even extend human life indefinitely. But in the wrong hands..." The recording flickered, and when it stabilized, Chester's expression had grown grave. "The people hunting me aren't just interested in the energy applications. They've realized that the consciousness interface could be weaponized, used to control or manipulate human thoughts on a massive scale. They want to turn my discovery into the ultimate tool of oppression." Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of what Chester was describing went far beyond anything he had imagined. "There's a group called the Prometheus Initiative," Chester continued. "They claim to be a private research consortium, but they're actually backed by military intelligence agencies from multiple countries. They've been developing their own version of consciousness manipulation technology, and they believe my work holds the key to perfecting their programs." The video shifted again, showing Chester standing beside a device that dwarfed the prototype in the basement laboratory. This version of the resonance engine was the size of a small building, with crystalline components that seemed to pulse with internal light. "I've spent the last decade building this full-scale version and testing its capabilities. The results exceed even my most optimistic projections. A single device could provide clean energy for an entire continent, while simultaneously enhancing the cognitive abilities of everyone within its field of influence. But the same technology that could usher in a new golden age for humanity could also enslave every mind on Earth." Lena moved closer to Jonas, instinctively seeking comfort as Chester's warnings grew more ominous. "The prototype in the basement laboratory is functional but limited," Chester explained. I designed it as a teaching tool, something that would allow my family to understand the principles involved without accessing the full power of the technology. But even that prototype will be enough to convince the Prometheus Initiative that you found my work. Chester's image flickered again, and when it returned, he was holding what appeared to be a small, crystalline device. This is a quantum communication beacon, he said. I've hidden one in the laboratory beneath your house. If you activate it, I'll know that you've discovered my secret, and I'll begin the process of emerging from hiding. But Jonas, you need to understand, once you activate that beacon, there's no going back. The Prometheus Initiative will detect the signal, and they'll mobilize every resource they have to capture you, Lena, and the technology. The weight of the decision Chester was asking them to make settled on Jonas like a physical burden. They could ignore the beacon, pretend they had never found the laboratory, and try to live normal lives. But Webb and his associates had already found them, and Jonas doubted they would be allowed to simply walk away from Chester's secrets. If you choose to activate the beacon, Chester continued, you'll be committing yourself and Lena to a path that will put you in constant danger until we can find a way to make the technology public and prevent it from being monopolized by any single group. But if you don't activate it, the Prometheus Initiative will eventually find the prototype anyway, and they'll use it to locate my full-scale device. Chester's expression softened, and for a moment he looked like the eccentric Uncle Jonas remembered from family gatherings. I know I'm asking a lot of you, Jonas. You didn't choose this responsibility, and it's not fair that Lena has to grow up in the shadow of my work. But she's special. I can see it in the genetic markers, the same intuitive connection to quantum fields that her grandmother possessed. Lena may be the key to ensuring that humanity uses this technology wisely. The recording began to fade, but Chester's final words came through clearly. The beacon is hidden behind the main control panel of the prototype. If you decide to activate it, place your hand on the crystalline surface and think clearly about making contact with me. The quantum entanglement between the beacon and my device will carry your intention across any distance. But remember, once you make that choice, your old lives will be over forever. The television screen went dark, leaving Jonas and Lena sitting in the underground laboratory with the most important decision of their lives ahead of them. Above them, Jonas could hear the sound of vehicles in their driveway. Webb had returned, probably with more men and less patience than he had shown during his previous visits. "Dad," Lena whispered, "Uncle Chester is really alive." "It sounds like it, sweetheart," Jonas replied, still struggling to process everything they had learned. "And he needs our help?" Jonas looked at his daughter's face, seeing the same determination that had helped her solve Chester's puzzles. "Yes, I think he does." The sound of breaking glass from upstairs told them that Webb's men were no longer bothering with polite requests for entry. Whatever decision Jonas and Lena made about Chester's beacon, they needed to make it quickly. "What do you think we should do?" Jonas asked, realizing that his 8-year-old daughter might have better judgment about this situation than he did. Lena looked at the resonance engine prototype, then at the television screen where Chester's image had been. "Uncle Chester trusted us with his secret," she said simply. "We should trust him too." Jonas nodded, knowing she was right. They moved to the prototype device and found the hidden panel Chester had described. Behind it was a crystalline object about the size of a smartphone, glowing with the same soft blue light they had seen in Chester's key. As footsteps echoed down the staircase to the laboratory, Jonas placed his hand on the beacon and focused his thoughts on a single, clear intention. "We need help, Chester. We're ready to do whatever it takes to protect your work and make sure it's used for good." The beacon flared with brilliant light, and Jonas felt a strange sensation, as if his consciousness had expanded beyond the boundaries of his physical body. For just a moment, he sensed another presence, distant but unmistakably real, acknowledging his call for help. Then Webb's voice echoed through the laboratory. Well, it seems the Calder family has more surprises than we anticipated." The laboratory access panel was more sophisticated than anything Jonas had imagined possible, even after discovering Chester's underground research facility. Hidden beneath what appeared to be a simple metal grate near the resonance engine prototype, the panel revealed itself only when both Jonas and Lena placed their hands on its biometric scanners simultaneously. Genetic authentication confirmed, the panel announced in a synthesized voice. Dual family member access protocol activated. Welcome to Sanctuary Level 2. Jonas felt his heart skip a beat. Sanctuary Level 2 implied there had been a Level 1 and possibly others. How deep did Chester's preparations go? The panel slid aside to reveal another staircase, this one leading even deeper underground. But before Jonas and Lena could explore further, they heard Marcus Webb's voice echoing from the level above them. "Seal the upper laboratory," Webb commanded his men. "If they've activated any kind of communication system, we need to prevent outside contact while we secure the technology." Jonas realized they had walked into a trap. By activating Chester's quantum beacon, they had not only summoned help from their uncle, they had also alerted Webb's organization to the exact location of the hidden laboratory. "Dad, we have to go deeper," Lena whispered, pointing toward the newly revealed staircase. "Uncle Chester wouldn't have built this unless we needed it." They descended quickly, the staircase spiraling down into what felt like the Earth's core. Motion-activated lights illuminated their path, revealing that this level of Chester's facility was even more sophisticated than the laboratory above. The walls were lined with what appeared to be advanced shielding material, and the air hummed with the barely audible vibration of powerful electronic systems. The corridor at the bottom of the staircase opened into a control room that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Multiple screens lined the walls, displaying data streams, security camera feeds, and what appeared to be real-time readings from sensors throughout the house and surrounding area. But what stopped Jonas in his tracks was the figure sitting calmly in a chair before the main control console. Chester Calder turned around and smiled at them, exactly as he had appeared in the video message, but somehow more solid, more real, more present than Jonas had expected. "Hello, Jonas," Chester said, his voice carrying the same dry humor Jonas remembered from childhood. "Hello, Lena. I was wondering when you two would make it down here." Jonas stared at his uncle, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "You're really alive? You've been here the whole time?" "Not the whole time," Chester replied, standing up from his chair with the careful movements of a man in his 70s. "But I've been monitoring the house since you moved in, waiting to see if you would discover my work and what you would choose to do with it." Lena ran to Chester and hugged him without hesitation, displaying the kind of trust that children reserve for family members who have proven themselves worthy of it. Chester knelt down and embraced her, his eyes bright with genuine affection. "You've done wonderfully, little one," he told her. "Your intuition about my puzzles was better than I could have hoped for." "Uncle Chester," Jonas said, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. "Webb and his men are in the laboratory upstairs. They know about the prototype, and they're looking for us." Chester nodded calmly. "Marcus Webb represents the Prometheus Initiative, just as I explained in my message. They've been hunting me for 3 decades, and they finally tracked my work to this location when you activated the quantum beacon." "Then we're trapped," Jonas said. "They have men surrounding the house, and we're underground with no way out." Chester's smile widened. "Jonas, you're thinking like someone who believes in conventional limitations, but we're not dealing with conventional technology here." He gestured toward the screens lining the control room walls. Jonas could see security camera feeds showing Webb's men positioned throughout the house and around the property. There were at least a dozen armed individuals, far more than Jonas had realized. "The Prometheus Initiative wants my technology," Chester continued, "but they fundamentally misunderstand what they're dealing with. They think the resonance engine is just an advanced energy generator that can be mass-produced and weaponized. They have no comprehension of the consciousness interface component." Chester moved to the main control console and began activating systems with practiced efficiency. The screens around them came alive with data streams and technical readouts that meant nothing to Jonas, but clearly represented enormous complexity. The consciousness interface isn't just a feature of the technology, Chester explained as he worked. It's the core principle that makes everything else possible. The device doesn't generate energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations. It allows human consciousness to access and direct energy that was always there, waiting for us to evolve enough to perceive it. One of the screens showed a three-dimensional representation of the house and surrounding area, with energy patterns flowing through the structure like luminous rivers. "I've spent 30 years preparing for this moment," Chester said, "not just developing the technology, but creating the conditions necessary for it to be revealed to the world in a way that prevents any single group from controlling it." He turned to face Jonas and Lena, his expression growing serious. "The prototype upstairs isn't actually a prototype, Jonas. It's a complete, fully functional resonance engine, calibrated specifically for this location and this moment. I've been using it to maintain a quantum field around the entire property, a field that's been slowly expanding and strengthening for decades." Jonas felt a chill of understanding. "You've been preparing a demonstration." "More than that," Chester replied. "I've been preparing a transformation. When Webb and his men try to remove the device from this location, they'll trigger a cascade reaction that will activate every piece of equipment in the house simultaneously. The resulting field effect will be visible from space and impossible to suppress or contain." Lena looked up at Chester with complete trust. "Will it hurt people?" Chester knelt down beside her again. "No, little one. The field will enhance consciousness, not harm it. People within its influence will experience expanded awareness, increased empathy, and enhanced cognitive abilities. But they'll also become immune to the kind of mental manipulation that the Prometheus Initiative specializes in." He stood up and returned his attention to the control systems. "The technology can't be weaponized because it fundamentally changes the consciousness of anyone who tries to use it for harmful purposes. A person operating the resonance engine with malicious intent will find their own awareness expanded to the point where they can no longer maintain malicious thoughts." Jonas began to understand the elegance of Chester's plan. By allowing Webb to discover the laboratory and attempt to steal the technology, Chester was ensuring that the demonstration would happen under conditions that would make it impossible for any government or corporation to claim ownership of the discovery. "But what about us?" Jonas asked. "We'll be at the center of this field effect when it activates." Chester's smile returned. "You and Lena have been exposed to quantum field influences since you moved into the house. Your consciousness has already begun adapting to the expanded awareness that the full activation will bring. You'll experience the transformation more gradually and comfortably than the men upstairs." On the security screens, Jonas could see Webb's team setting up equipment around the resonance engine prototype. They had apparently decided to remove the device from the laboratory, exactly as Chester had predicted. "How long do we have?" Jonas asked. "Minutes," Chester replied. "Once they attempt to disconnect the device from its power source, the cascade will begin automatically. The quantum field that's been building around this property for 30 years will discharge all at once, creating a demonstration that will change how humanity understands consciousness, energy, and our place in the universe." Lena tugged on Chester's sleeve. "Uncle Chester, will my daddy and I be okay?" Chester knelt down one more time and took both of Lena's small hands in his. "More than okay, sweetheart. You're going to help your daddy and me show the world something wonderful. Something that will make sure no one ever has to be afraid or hungry or alone again." Above them, alarms began sounding as Webb's men started their attempt to extract the resonance engine. Chester moved to a final control panel and placed his hand on what appeared to be a quantum beacon, similar to the one Jonas had activated earlier. "Are you ready?" Chester asked, looking at both Jonas and Lena. Jonas took his daughter's hand and nodded. Whatever was about to happen, they would face it together as a family. Chester activated the beacon, and the entire underground facility began to vibrate with barely contained energy. The transformation that would change everything was about to begin. The complete energy device that Chester had spent 3 decades perfecting was far more beautiful and terrifying than Jonas had imagined. Through the security monitors in the underground control room, he watched Webb's men struggle to understand what they were attempting to steal, as the prototype in the laboratory above began to resonate with harmonics that seemed to come from the Earth itself. "They have no idea what they're touching," Chester said, his fingers dancing across control panels with the practiced precision of a concert pianist. "The Prometheus Initiative thinks they're dealing with conventional technology that can be transported and reverse-engineered. They don't understand that consciousness-responsive quantum fields can't be contained or controlledly guided." On the main screen, Jonas could see Webb directing his team with increasing urgency. The man's confidence from their earlier encounters had been replaced by barely controlled frustration as his technical specialists struggled to make sense of Chester's device. Every attempt to disconnect the prototype from its power source triggered warning alarms and caused the crystalline components to glow more brightly. "The cascade is beginning," Chester announced, pointing to a series of readouts that showed energy levels rising throughout the house and surrounding property. 30 years of accumulated quantum field potential is about to discharge in a single coordinated pulse. Lena pressed closer to Jonas, her small hand gripping his with surprising strength. "Dad, I can feel it happening. It's like the whole house is waking up." Jonas realized his daughter was right. Even in the shielded control room, he could sense something changing in the very fabric of reality around them. The air itself seemed to vibrate with potential, and he found his thoughts becoming clearer and more focused than he had ever experienced. "The consciousness interface is already beginning to affect you," Chester explained. "Your awareness is expanding to perceive quantum field fluctuations directly. Most people never develop this sensitivity, but it appears to run in our family bloodline." Chester moved to what appeared to be the main control station, a sophisticated console that looked more like an altar than conventional electronics. At its center sat a crystalline sphere about the size of a basketball, glowing with the same blue light Jonas had seen in the various components of Chester's technology. "This is the heart of the system," Chester said, his voice taking on a reverent tone. "The consciousness interface core. It's been slowly building a quantum entanglement network that connects every piece of equipment in the house, every electronic device in the neighborhood, and ultimately every conscious mind within a 50-mile radius." Jonas felt his breath catch. 50 miles? Chester, that includes hundreds of thousands of people." "Exactly," Chester replied, his eyes bright with an emotion Jonas couldn't quite identify. "When the cascade completes, every person within the field will experience a temporary expansion of consciousness. They'll perceive reality from a broader perspective, understand their connection to the quantum field that underlies all existence, and most importantly, become immune to the kind of mental manipulation that organizations like the Prometheus Initiative depend on." On the security monitors, Jonas could see that Webb's men had finally managed to begin disconnecting the prototype from its mounting brackets. The moment they lifted the device, every screen in the control room flashed red, and a deep harmonic tone began emanating from the walls themselves. "Cascade initiation confirmed," Chester announced, his voice rising with excitement. "All quantum field generators are now entering synchronized resonance. Field expansion will reach maximum extent in approximately 12 minutes. Jonas watched in fascination as the three-dimensional display showed energy patterns spreading outward from their location, like ripples in a cosmic pond. The patterns were beautiful, flowing in spirals and geometric forms that seemed to follow the natural topology of consciousness itself. "Uncle Chester," Lena said, her voice carrying a strange quality that Jonas had never heard before. "I can see the patterns in my mind. They're connecting to people everywhere, like a giant web of light." Chester knelt beside Lena, studying her face with intense interest. "You're perceiving the quantum entanglement network directly, aren't you, without any technological interface?" Lena nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful, Uncle Chester. I can feel all the people, their thoughts and feelings and dreams." They're all connected, but most of them don't know it yet. Jonas felt a moment of paternal concern. Is this safe for her? She's just a child. She's more than just a child, Chester replied, his voice filled with awe. Lena appears to have a natural sensitivity to quantum consciousness fields that's far beyond anything I've documented. She may be the first member of our species to develop these abilities organically, without technological assistance. The security monitors showed increasing chaos in the laboratory above. Webb's men were struggling to maintain control as their electronic equipment began malfunctioning. Radios crackled with interference, computers displayed impossible data streams, and the prototype device itself had begun levitating several inches above the floor, suspended by forces that conventional physics couldn't explain. "Sir, we need to evacuate immediately." Jonas could hear one of Webb's technicians reporting through the security system. "The device is exhibiting properties that don't match any known technology. Energy readings are off the charts, and we're detecting field effects that could be dangerous to human physiology." But Webb's response was exactly what Chester had predicted. "Negative. We're not leaving without that device. If it's more advanced than our intelligence suggested, that makes it even more valuable. Continue extraction procedures." Chester shook his head sadly. Marcus Webb represents everything that's wrong with how humanity approaches new technology. Instead of trying to understand it, instead of considering how it might benefit everyone, his first instinct is to control and weaponize it. The harmonic tone that had been emanating from the walls was growing stronger, and Jonas could feel it resonating in his bones. More than that, he could feel it resonating in his thoughts themselves, as if the sound was somehow harmonizing with the electrical patterns in his brain. "Chester, what exactly is going to happen when this cascade reaches full intensity?" Jonas asked. Chester moved to a bank of monitors showing real-time brain activity patterns from sensors throughout the house and surrounding area. "Every conscious mind within the field will experience what I call consciousness resonance. Their individual awareness will temporarily synchronize with the quantum field that connects all matter and energy in the universe. They'll understand, on a direct experiential level, that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, it's a fundamental property of reality itself." The implications were staggering. Jonas tried to imagine hundreds of thousands of people suddenly experiencing expanded consciousness simultaneously. "Won't that cause panic?" "Initially, perhaps," Chester admitted, "but the expansion brings with it an increased capacity for empathy and understanding. People will realize that harming others ultimately harms themselves, because at the quantum level, we're all aspects of the same unified consciousness experiencing itself from different perspectives." On the screens, Jonas could see that the effects were already beginning to manifest in the laboratory above. Webb's men were moving more slowly, their aggressive postures softening as the expanding field began to influence their consciousness. Several of them had stopped working entirely and were staring at the levitating prototype with expressions of wonder rather than greed. "Look at their faces," Lena said softly. "They're starting to understand." But Webb himself seemed to be resisting the field effects through sheer force of will. "Focus on the mission," he barked at his men. "Don't let some kind of psychoactive field manipulation interfere with your training. We have a job to complete." Chester frowned as he watched Webb's continued resistance. "Interesting. He's been conditioned to maintain rigid mental barriers against consciousness, expanding influences. The Prometheus Initiative has apparently developed techniques for protecting their operatives from exactly this kind of field effect." "Is that bad?" Jonas asked. "It means Webb won't experience the empathy expansion that should prevent him from trying to weaponize the technology," Chester replied. "He'll remain dangerous even after the cascade completes." The energy readings on Chester's instruments were approaching critical levels. The quantum field expansion was now spreading beyond the immediate property, reaching into the surrounding neighborhood and beyond. Jonas could see from the three-dimensional display that thousands of people were about to experience consciousness resonance for the first time in human history. 7 minutes to maximum field extent," Chester announced. Jonas, Lena, I need you both to place your hands on the consciousness interface core. Your direct family connection to the field will help stabilize the expansion and ensure it manifests as enhancement rather than disruption. Jonas looked at the glowing crystalline sphere at the center of Chester's control console. What will happen to us? You'll become the focal points for the field expansion, Chester explained. Your consciousness will temporarily merge with the quantum field itself, allowing you to guide how the technology manifests for everyone within its influence. You'll have the power to ensure that this transformation serves humanity's highest good. Lena was already reaching toward the crystal, her small face serene with anticipation. It wants us to touch it, Dad. It's been waiting for us. Jonas took a deep breath and placed his hand on the warm, pulsing surface of the consciousness interface core. Immediately, his awareness exploded beyond the boundaries of his individual identity. He could perceive the thoughts and feelings of every person within the expanding field, could sense the quantum connections that linked all matter and energy in the universe, could feel the infinite potential that lay dormant within human consciousness. Beside him, Lena's touch on the crystal created a harmony of awareness that was indescribably beautiful. Together, father and daughter became conduits for a transformation that would change not just their own lives, but the fundamental relationship between humanity and the cosmos itself. The cascade was entering its final phase, and the real confrontation was about to begin. Chester's decoy device was a masterpiece of misdirection, identical to the real resonance engine in every visible detail, but fundamentally different in its quantum structure. As Webb's men finally succeeded in lifting what they believed was Chester's revolutionary invention, Jonas watched from the underground control room as the decoy began its carefully programmed performance. "Activation sequence confirmed," Chester announced, his eyes fixed on the monitors showing Webb's team. "The decoy will provide exactly the kind of impressive display they expect while masking the true source of the consciousness field expansion." The fake device began to levitate more dramatically, spinning slowly in the air while projecting holographic displays of complex mathematical equations. Lights pulsed in rhythm with harmonic tones that filled the laboratory, creating exactly the kind of spectacular demonstration that would convince Webb's superiors that they had captured Chester's technology. But Jonas, his consciousness still expanded through contact with the real interface core, could perceive what was actually happening. The true resonance engine was the entire house-savory piece of equipment, every carefully placed component, every quantum field generator that Chester had installed over 3 decades of patient preparation. The device Webb was stealing was merely the most visible element of a technology that had been integrated into the fabric of reality itself. "They'll never understand what they actually have," Chester said with satisfaction. "The decoy will function perfectly for basic energy generation, even provide some limited consciousness interface effects. But it's missing the quantum entanglement network that makes the real technology revolutionary." On the security monitors, Jonas could see Webb directing his men to transport the levitating device toward the laboratory exit. The man's face showed a mixture of triumph and barely controlled greed as he supervised what he believed was the theft of the century. "Sir, the readings are unlike anything we've ever documented," one of Webb's technicians reported. "This device appears to be tapping directly into zero-point energy fields. The applications are practically unlimited." Webb's response was exactly what Chester had predicted. "Excellent. Prepare it for immediate transport to the secure facility. Our employers will want to begin reverse engineering immediately." But as Webb's team maneuvered the decoy device up the stairs from the laboratory, the real transformation was accelerating. Jonas could feel the consciousness field expanding outward from their location like a wave of pure awareness, touching minds throughout the surrounding area. "Dad," Lena whispered, her small hand still pressed against the interface core. "People are waking up everywhere. I can feel them starting to understand." Jonas opened his expanded awareness to perceive what his daughter was sensing. Throughout the neighborhood, throughout the city, people were stopping their daily activities as the consciousness field reached them. They stood motionless for moments, eyes wide with wonder, as their individual awareness briefly merged with the infinite perspective of the quantum field. A mother playing with her children in a nearby park suddenly understood the profound connection between all living things. A businessman stuck in traffic realized that his pursuit of wealth was meaningless compared to the love he felt for his family. An elderly man sitting alone in his apartment felt the loneliness that had plagued him for years dissolve as he perceived his fundamental unity with all existence. "The expansion is reaching its maximum extent," Chester announced. "Field effects are now active across a 50-mile radius. Approximately 800,000 people are experiencing consciousness resonance simultaneously." On the monitors, Jonas could see that Webb's men had successfully transported the decoy device to ground level and were loading it into a specially equipped truck. But their movements had become strangely synchronized, as if they were all responding to the same unheard rhythm. "Even the Prometheus Initiative operatives are being affected," Chester observed. "Their conditioning can't completely protect them from direct exposure to consciousness field resonance." Webb himself seemed to be the only person maintaining complete resistance to the field effects. He moved with the same aggressive efficiency as before, barking orders at his men and coordinating the extraction operation with military precision. "Get that device secured and initiate departure protocols," Webb commanded. "We need to be mobile before local authorities respond to whatever these field effects are causing." But as Webb's truck began to pull away from the house, Jonas felt something shift in the quantum field patterns. The consciousness interface core beneath his palm grew warmer, and Lena's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Uncle Chester," she said urgently, "the bad man isn't finished. He's going to try to hurt people with the fake device." Chester frowned as he examined his instruments. "Impossible. The decoy doesn't have the power to—" He stopped mid-sentence as new readings appeared on his screens. "No. He's not planning to use the device as a weapon. He's planning to use it as bait." Jonas felt his heart sink as he understood Chester's realization. Webb wasn't just stealing the technology, he was using the dramatic theft as a distraction, while other Prometheus Initiative operatives moved to capture Jonas, Lena, and Chester himself. "There are more teams," Chester said grimly, pointing to new contacts appearing on his security sensors. "They're surrounding the property while we're focused on the primary extraction." Webb was never interested in just the device, he wants the people who created it. The real confrontation was just beginning, and Jonas realized that protecting Chester's technology might require sacrifices he wasn't prepared to make. The patent documents that Chester had hidden throughout the house for 3 decades suddenly became the most important papers in human history. As Jonas maintained contact with the consciousness interface core, he realized that his uncle had been preparing for this moment since the day he had faked his own death, not just technologically, but legally. Every component, every principle, every application of the resonance engine technology has been documented and filed with patent offices in 47 countries. Chester explained as alarms continued to sound from the security systems. But the patents were filed under sealed military classification, accessible only under specific circumstances. Jonas could see Webb's reinforcement teams closing in on the house through the underground facility's perimeter sensors. Men in tactical gear were positioning themselves at every possible exit, while electronic surveillance equipment scanned for signs of the real laboratory. "What circumstances?" Jonas asked, though part of his expanded consciousness already knew the answer. "Public demonstration of the technology's consciousness enhancement capabilities," Chester replied. The moment the field expansion reached its maximum extent and affected 800,000 people simultaneously, automatic triggers activated in government databases worldwide. The classified patents are now entering the public domain. Lena's grip on the interface core tightened, and Jonas could feel her awareness reaching out to touch the minds of people throughout the affected area. "Uncle Chester, everyone who felt the field expansion knows about the patents now. They understand what the technology can do, and they want to protect it." Jonas opened his own consciousness to perceive what Lena was sensing. Throughout the 50-mile radius affected by the consciousness field, people were accessing the newly declassified patent documents through government websites that had been programmed to release the information automatically. Scientists, engineers, and ordinary citizens were downloading the complete technical specifications for Chester's resonance engine technology. Brilliant, Jonas breathed, understanding the elegance of his uncle's plan. You've made it impossible for any single organization to monopolize the technology. By the time Webb realizes what's happened, millions of people will have access to the complete blueprints. Chester nodded, but his expression remained grave. The legal protection is only the beginning. Webb and the Prometheus Initiative won't be stopped by patent filings. They'll try to capture us and force us to build customized versions of the technology for their specific applications. On the security monitors, Jonas could see that Webb himself had returned to the house. He stood in the main laboratory, staring at the space where the decoy device had been, his face twisted with rage as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. "Sweep every room," Webb commanded his men. "They're still here somewhere, and they have access to the real technology. Find them." But Webb's men were moving more slowly than before, their aggressive postures continuing to soften as the consciousness field effects deepened their exposure to expanded awareness. Several of them had stopped following orders entirely, instead standing motionless with expressions of profound wonder. "Sir, the field effects are intensifying," one of Webb's technicians reported. "Our conditioning protocols aren't sufficient to maintain operational focus. Request permission to withdraw to minimum safe distance." Webb's response was immediate and harsh. "Negative. Activate the consciousness dampening equipment. We're not leaving without the primary targets." Jonas felt a chill as he watched Webb's men deploy devices he had never seen before, sophisticated electronic equipment that began projecting what appeared to be counter-resonance fields. The effect on the consciousness expansion was immediate and disturbing, like watching beautiful music being drowned out by discordant noise. "They've developed suppression technology," Chester said grimly. "I theorized this was possible, but I hoped they hadn't progressed to practical applications." The consciousness dampening fields were creating zones of mental isolation throughout the house, severing the quantum connections that allowed expanded awareness. Jonas could feel his own enhanced perception beginning to fade in some areas, though the interface core maintained its connection in the shielded underground facility. "They're trying to cut us off from the field network," Lena said, her voice carrying a note of distress that Jonas had never heard before. "I can still feel the people outside, but the connection is getting weaker." Chester moved quickly to a secondary control panel and began activating systems that Jonas hadn't seen before. "Emergency protocols," he explained. "If the consciousness field is being suppressed, we need to shift to the backup plan." "There's a backup plan?" Jonas asked. "The patent documents were just the first line of defense," Chester replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "But the real protection comes from the technology itself. Watch." On the main display, Jonas could see the three-dimensional representation of the consciousness field as it responded to Webb's suppression equipment. Instead of simply fading, the field began to adapt, shifting its resonance frequencies to work around the dampening zones. "The quantum entanglement network is self-modifying," Chester explained. "Every attempt to suppress consciousness expansion actually teaches the system how to overcome that specific type of interference. Webb's equipment is making the field stronger, not weaker." Jonas watched in amazement as the field patterns flowed like water around obstacles, finding new pathways to maintain the connections between expanded minds. The people throughout the 50-mile radius who had experienced consciousness resonance were now working together unconsciously, their collective awareness adapting to maintain the network despite technological interference. "It's alive," Lena whispered in wonder. "The field is learning and growing and becoming more than Uncle Chester designed it to be." Chester knelt beside her, his eyes bright with scientific fascination. "You're right, little one. The consciousness interface has evolved beyond my original parameters." It's become a truly collaborative intelligence, guided by the collective intention of everyone within its influence. But Webb wasn't finished. Jonas could see through the security monitors that the man had pulled out what appeared to be a military-grade communication device and was calling for additional support. Priority Alpha Authorization, Webb spoke into the device. Request immediate deployment of the Prometheus protocol. We have confirmed contact with the consciousness technology, and civilian population exposure has exceeded acceptable parameters. Chester's face went pale. The Prometheus protocol. I had hoped they would never develop it to operational status. What is it? Jonas asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Weaponized consciousness suppression, Chester replied grimly. Instead of just blocking expanded awareness, it actively degrades human consciousness, reducing people to a state where they can't think independently or resist authoritarian control. It's everything I've spent my life trying to prevent. The implications were horrifying. Jonas realized that Webb's organization wasn't just interested in stealing Chester's technology, they were prepared to destroy human consciousness itself, rather than allow it to evolve naturally. How long before they can deploy it? Jonas asked. Chester checked his instruments and frowned. The equipment is already airborne. Military transport aircraft carrying Prometheus protocol transmitters are approaching the area. They'll begin broadcasting suppression fields in approximately 8 minutes. Lena's hand pressed more firmly against the interface core, and Jonas could feel her consciousness reaching out to touch every mind within the expanded awareness network. Uncle Chester, all the people who felt the field, they know what's coming. They're scared, but they want to help. Jonas opened his own awareness and felt what Lena was perceiving. Throughout the region, hundreds of thousands of people were experiencing a form of collective determination he had never imagined possible. They understood that their expanded consciousness was under attack, and they were prepared to defend it. They're not just defending the technology, Jonas realized. They're defending their own evolution. Chester nodded solemnly. This is the moment I've been preparing for since I first discovered the consciousness interface principles. Humanity is choosing between two paths: expanded awareness and empathetic connection, or technological control and mental slavery. The sound of aircraft engines grew audible even in the underground facility. Webb's reinforcements were arriving, and the final confrontation was about to begin. What do we do? Jonas asked, looking at his uncle and daughter, two people who represented both the past and future of human consciousness. Chester placed his own hand on the interface core, joining Jonas and Lena in direct contact with the quantum field network. We trust in the technology we've unleashed and the people it's connected. The consciousness field has grown beyond anything I originally designed. Now it's up to humanity itself to determine how this story ends. Above them, Jonas could hear Webb's men beginning their final assault on the underground facility. The battle for the future of human consciousness was about to reach its climax. Lena's inheritance box sat on the kitchen table, where Chester had left it 3 months after the consciousness field expansion changed everything. The small wooden container, carved with the same geometric patterns that had appeared throughout Chester's technology, contained items that represented not just the past, but the unlimited potential of the future. Jonas watched his daughter examine each object with the careful attention she had inherited from both her great-uncle and the expanded awareness that now connected her to the quantum field permanently. At 9 years old, Lena had become something unprecedented in human history, a child born into normal consciousness who had evolved naturally into a state of permanent quantum awareness. This was Grandma Sarah's notebook, Lena said, holding up a leather-bound journal filled with her great-grandmother's research notes. Uncle Chester says she was the first in our family to sense the quantum connections, even though she didn't have the technology to prove they existed. Jonas nodded, still amazed by how much their understanding of their family history had expanded. Chester's revelations after the consciousness field activation had included the discovery that the Calder family had carried genetic markers for quantum sensitivity for generations. Lena's grandmother, mother, and now Lena herself represented an evolutionary development that made them natural interfaces between human consciousness and the fundamental structure of reality. The transformation that had begun 3 months ago was still spreading. The consciousness field expansion had affected 800,000 people initially, but those individuals had become seeds for further expansion. Each person who experienced quantum awareness naturally developed the ability to facilitate the same expansion in others. Governments and corporations worldwide were struggling to adapt to a population that could no longer be controlled through traditional methods of manipulation and propaganda. "The Prometheus Initiative has been disbanded," Jonas said, reading from a news report on his tablet. Marcus Webb and his associates are facing trial for crimes against humanity, though most of them have been granted clemency in exchange for cooperation with the Global Consciousness Research Initiative. Chester looked up from the advanced electronics he was assembling at the opposite end of the kitchen table. At 75, he had emerged from 30 years of hiding to become humanity's leading expert on consciousness-responsive technology, working with scientists worldwide to ensure the peaceful development of quantum awareness applications. Webb's conditioning made him immune to empathy expansion initially, Chester mused. But even he couldn't resist the field effects indefinitely. His testimony has been invaluable in identifying other consciousness suppression programs and dismantling them before they could be deployed. The house itself had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. People from around the world came to visit the location where human consciousness had first made contact with the quantum field through technological interface. But Chester had been careful to ensure that the house remained a family home first and a historical landmark second. "Dad, look at this," Lena said, pulling a small crystalline device from the inheritance box. The object was similar to the consciousness interface core, but smaller and somehow more personal. "Uncle Chester says this was made especially for me." Jonas examined the crystal, noting how it responded to Lena's touch with gentle pulses of blue light. "What does it do?" "It helps me focus my quantum awareness when I'm working with the bigger devices," Lena explained. "Uncle Chester is teaching me how to help design the next generation of consciousness interface technology. The kind that will help everyone connect to the quantum field naturally, without needing the big machines." Chester smiled at his great niece with obvious pride. "Lena's natural abilities far exceed anything I've been able to achieve with technology. She represents the future of human consciousness individuals who can access quantum awareness as easily as they can see or hear." The implications for humanity's future were staggering. Children born after the consciousness field expansion were developing quantum sensitivity naturally, without technological assistance. Scientists projected that within 2 generations, expanded awareness would become the normal state of human consciousness. Jonas picked up another item from the inheritance box, a photograph of the house, as it had looked 30 years earlier, before Chester had spent decades transforming it into a consciousness research facility. "It's hard to believe this all started with us just needing a place to live." "Everything important starts with simple needs," Chester replied. "Shelter, family, the desire to understand our place in the universe." The consciousness technology didn't create anything new, it just revealed connections that were always there, waiting for us to evolve enough to perceive them. The final item in Lena's inheritance box was a letter addressed to her in Chester's careful handwriting. She read it silently, her expression growing serious as she absorbed her great-uncle's words. "He says the technology will keep growing and changing," she told Jonas. "And someday, when I'm older, I'll need to help make decisions about how humanity uses quantum consciousness. He says it's a big responsibility, but I don't have to carry it alone because everyone who's been touched by the field expansion is connected to everyone else." Jonas felt a profound sense of peace as he watched his daughter accept the legacy Chester was passing to her. The financial struggles that had brought them to the junk house seemed like they had happened in another lifetime. The consciousness field expansion had led to technological breakthroughs that had solved energy scarcity, environmental degradation, and many of the economic problems that had once seemed insurmountable. More importantly, the expansion of human empathy and understanding had begun to address the root causes of conflict and suffering. It was becoming increasingly difficult for people to harm others when they could directly perceive the quantum connections that linked all consciousness. "Will you help me learn to use Grandma Sarah's notebook?" Lena asked, holding up the journal of her great-grandmother's early research. "Of course, sweetheart," Jonas replied. "We'll learn together, just like we learned to solve Uncle Chester's puzzles." As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of what had once been called the junk house, Jonas reflected on how loss and desperation had led them to the greatest discovery in human history. They had come to this place as refugees from a financial system that had failed them, and they had found not just shelter, but a doorway to humanity's evolutionary future. Lena carefully packed her inheritance items back into Chester's wooden box, but she kept the small consciousness interface crystal in her hand, where it continued to pulse with gentle light in response to her natural quantum awareness. Outside, the world was changing in ways that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But inside the house where it all began, 3 generations of the Calder family continued the quiet work of helping humanity understand its place in the infinite mystery of consciousness and cosmos.